Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. This time, at least, I got to do an announced live haul. The last two that I did on Sunday were kind of spontaneous, and it was interesting to see who would show up. But this time, I needed to do a little bit of planning because if you were following anything on my Instagram or my Facebook, or I can't remember if I put anything on YouTube, but I spent the weekend doing a little bit of a road trip, doing some sourcing, heading down from where I am outside Chicago, headed down to Kentucky. And part of the trip was specifically to attend the first estate sale that George the Antique Nomad was scheduling post-COVID. So it was going to be chock full of all the stuff he wasn't able to sell in the 3 months that everything was shut down. And so I knew a good thing when I heard it. So I pretty much invited myself and I said, hey, I want to come down to Kentucky. So it turned to a great weekend. So George, Fatbird Finds is also in Kentucky. So they joined us, Laura and Mary Beth. We then, Misty found out about it, and she knew that also she knew a good thing when she heard it. So Misty was only a couple hours away, and Jeffrey came around. So we had Real Nifty Vintage, Thrifter, Junker, Vintage Hunter. Oh, I'm getting really good at that name now. And I was the one that drove the farthest, but it was worth every mile on the car. I had an absolute blast. And so I did a couple of hauls, like I said, on Sunday from the hotel, because I was buying so much that I'm like, if I waited, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do everything, or it was going to be like some 4-hour haul video. So did the couple, got those out of the way, and then said, hey, George, want to do a live haul with me? And you could talk about, so then, hey, maybe I don't have to do as much research. You can tell me about it. But no, I wanted to have George on. So tonight we've got George, the Antique Nomad. And go ahead and I just did a little bit, but go ahead and introduce yourself, George.
Well, thank you. It's nice to see all of you again. I am the Antique Nomad, and I call myself that because under ordinary circumstances, I'm traveling coast to coast, and I buy and sell antiques. I do shows. I conduct estate sales and appraisals, and I have a storage house in Kentucky because I run into a lot of people, especially in Florida, who live in condos. They can't have a sale. During COVID, especially, we've had no access to be able to do these sorts of things. So my little house got really full. And to be honest, I mentioned just off the cuff one time, oh yeah, I think I'm going to have an estate sale. And to tell you the truth, I still haven't had a public estate sale. So I'll probably have another invitational. And if you folks who didn't get to come want to come, you're certainly welcome. But it was just, I said, oh, I think I'm going to have an estate sale. And Patrick reached out, and then some other folks latched on, and it was so much fun. When I started my channel, honestly, a lot of my drive was to show people that there's this real world of antiques and collecting, as well as the online world. And because I've been a show dealer for 20 years, and it's really fun. It's really collegial. People all have the same love and interest in this. And so it was so neat to be able to get together with some other YouTubers. And I loved it so much that I can't wait to do more and more and more of that, and someday meet all of you. So that's how this happened. And I'm glad to be here with you and talk about your stuff.
Excellent. Yeah. And I'm thrilled to have you. I will just say, if you ever have the opportunity of shopping with George, or even attending shopping with one of his estate sales, do it, because you don't even need to pull out your WorthPoint or eBay subscription. You could just jump on George. Hey, George, what's this? Hey, George, what does he normally sell for? It's a completely different experience, and I feel we might have abused him a little bit, but I think we all had a blast. We all got some great video content. So definitely be watching. Jeffrey joined us tonight. Thanks for being here, Jeffrey. So did Misty. So definitely make sure you're subscribing to their channels, as well as Fatbird Finds, because I'm sure all of us, including George, I don't think filmed anything during the estate sale that we attended, but we did go shopping after that. And I know he filmed at some of those. So we're all going to probably have some decent content, and you might see a couple of us making cameos in the background of some of the other videos. And Fatbird Finds is on here too. Everyone, this probably won't take a huge amount of time. I didn't pull everything. I wanted to be sensitive to George's time. But I did pull some fun items. And what I did this weekend, I stretched myself on a couple different things. One, I've never done a shop with me video. Now, I did not do a shop with me video with George, and there was some practicalities with that. One, I was totally intimidated by the people I was with. Misty and Jeffrey and Fatbird Finds, they're all doing their videos, and they put out such amazing content. But from a practical standpoint, you would have been able to hear each of us. So people were taking turns doing their recordings. So I just said, you know what? I don't really do these. I wasn't comfortable yet. I did do them later. If you follow my Instagram, you'll see my very first attempt, and I'll just give you the shortcut. It was upside down. So that's how my experience worked. But there were some great items. And so we just pulled a couple highlights. And George said he'd kind of like walk me through a couple things because, the other thing I do is I stretched myself to pick up things I don't normally buy. And having George did give me the courage to do that, because he could say, well, this is what this is, or this is how common it is, or how rare it is, or how valuable it is. And so it did help me get into a couple areas of things that I have never carried, one of which being the item that I put into the thumbnail for this. I have seen these before, and this one was adorable. Now, even if I didn't know what it was, I would have picked it up because people that have joined my sales before, I support a charity, Just One More Dachshund Rescue, and I run a fundraiser for them, selling items for them. I don't have dachshunds very often, so I feel guilty when I do a dachshund rescue. This one is very turtle on there. So it's, for those who haven't seen this type of art before, you can see it's made up of tiny little rocks. And then what I thought was interesting is the turtle seems to be made out of sequins. So can you talk a little bit about this one, George?
Yes, I think that one's really fun because it actually came from a dear friend of mine's estate, and she had it when she was a little girl. Those were sometimes commercially made. You will see ones that have a factory stamp on the back, but it's usually some mom and pop operation. This one, you'll notice, does not have a stamp because they were also sold as kits. And you could actually buy them, and they'd have sort of like a paint by number, but you would put the cording on with glue, and then you would do each section. They'd have a little vial of sequins and a little vial of the dust and all that good stuff. And so you would actually, it'd be a project that a kid could do or a family could do together. And like I say, some also were done as commercial product, but it really was just a fun thing to do back then. And it was basically a home craft project. You don't see them very often. They were mostly done for children's rooms. And that one, you can tell with that fake wood grain on the masonite there, is going to date sometime in the late 60s, right around 1970. And so, kids grew up, mom throws everything out when the kids move out and turns it into her sewing room or her craft room or whatever. And so a lot of those have gone by the by. So I think they're really cute. I pick them up when I see them for sale as well. But when I'm having an estate sale, I don't buy out of the estates I do. It's a conflict of interest. And so that stuff is for other people.
Now, Misty commented, and this is where I first saw it, Misty had sold some. And I want to say Fatbird Finds picked one of them up. I want to say it was a really large peacock. They're calling it Pebble Art. Is that the traditional term for it?
That's what I've heard it referred to as, yes, as Pebble Art. And it really, again, some of it's commercially made, but a lot of it was just made using a kit or that sort of thing.
Oh, that's great. And I did not realize they were kits, and I didn't realize it was something for kids to do. So that's actually interesting in and of itself.
Well,
we did not have that when I was a kid, or at least I never saw those. We'd string art. That was about as sophisticated as we got, but did not see anything like that.
Well, if you think of, everybody kind of knows Enid Collins purses. Well, it's the same concept. They also sold those purses as kits. I remember my grandmother wouldn't pay for an Enid Collins because she could get the kit and make it herself. And it was the same concept where the outline was there and they'd give you all the little things in little plastic vials and then you would glue it all in yourself. Some of those purses are pretty cool too, but they don't say Enid Collins, so they sell for about half the price.
Oh, I can imagine. All right. Well, one of the next things I had, it's become something because I made it slip one time. So it's become a commentary that I'm not a big fan of kids, but I still buy kids stuff. And so if that was done by kids, I'll keep it, it's the dog. But I did actually pick up another item that was totally kid related. And I will absolutely 100% admit. Okay. So when I first saw this, I said, I need to get it. It's a children's, I'm assuming it's a children's muff. It's a winter muff. It's very small, so I don't think it's for an adult. It has this little cat head on it. And as I was prepping this for tonight, I realized I'm like, oh, there's like this weird thing on the back of his head. I wonder what that is. It made noise, scared me to death. So I don't know what child needs a squeaky winter muff, but I didn't find any. Okay, Tim has one of these. I'm assuming he uses it when his beard doesn't keep him warm enough. He pulls this out. There's no tags or anything on this, but I'm assuming the way it's made, the seam is serged. So this was commercially made. What era would this be?
That's going to be early 1960s, and you got all of that right. It is the Squeaker, and the great thing is that the Squeaker worked because they often don't. I think the concept was that you've got little kids, it's cold outside, and they don't want to wear mittens because it's a hassle putting them on and taking them off, and they want to have their hands free to do stuff, but you want them to keep the thing on, so we'll put a little squeaky kitty on it, and then they can play with the kitty cat, and then it's fun to wear, as opposed to mom made me put this thing on and it's bothering me and I don't like it. So that was the idea. That same head would have been on a full-size rubber cat as well. The same companies made those, and a lot of those were actually made in the Midwest. A lot of the rubber companies were in Indiana, for example, Auburn Rubber. The Sun Rubber Company was another one. I'm not sure who made that particular one, but they were referred to originally as Kitty Mew Mew. Obnoxious but cute. And Kitty Mew Mew, I know, had a full-bodied one because my sister had one when she was very little, and my mother has been looking for a replacement for it forever, and we've never found the exact one.
Wow. All right. One of the things I wanted to comment, I saw us looking at some of the names. Sorry, I missed so many people that had joined on. But one of the people that's joined us is Stephanie, and from Thrifting Adventures. She has her live sale tonight. So my goal is I will definitely be done before Stephanie does her live sale. I normally do my releases around the same time she does her videos, but I didn't want to step on her live sale. So we will be finished. But thanks, Stephanie, for joining us, and so many other people coming in. This one I picked up. There's actually a reason I picked this up. It's a Prince Valiant shield. I knew what it was, but it's primarily because I have just started trying to list things on eBay and getting into, again, trying to do some listings of things that I don't normally carry. And I listed a Photoplay magazine with Marilyn Monroe on the cover. And inside, as I was taking photographs of the magazine to show what the rest was in the magazine, it was the December 1953 issue. Had all the promotional photos of Prince Valiant. So Prince Valiant came out, it must have either come out in 53 or maybe probably 54, since it was promotional photos. So when I saw this, I thought, well, hey, I'll get this. I'm not, I don't know what to do with it. I'm not sure I'll sell it with the magazine. Thought it was kind of cool. And then the magazine sold. So I no longer have the magazine, but shipped that out today. But I've got the shield. So I'm assuming age-wise, this would have been something that would have been done with the release of the movie?
I think it's probably then, or possibly even a little bit later. It's lithograph on tin, and it is going to be 1950s vintage, definitely. Even into the early 60s, Prince Valiant as a cartoon has lasted for a long, long time. I'm not sure if it's still in syndication, but it was as recently as just a few years ago. It was sort of a weekly serial in the comics as well. So I think that the idea, again, was that not every kid wanted to play cowboys and Indians, so you give them a little shield and then they can play conquistador.
Oh, that shows what I knew. I didn't even realize Prince Valiant was a regular comic. I knew that I recognized it from the movie. So did the comic book come as or the comic come as a result of the movie, or did the movie come as a result of the comic?
That's a really good question, and I don't know enough background to tell you the answer to that. But typically back then, the comics came first and a movie was made after. It's different nowadays. Now we think of, nowadays you have movies like Batman Forever where the entire movie is built around the stuff that they want to sell. But back then, you establish something generally in writing as a book or a comic or something like that. And then if it was popular enough, then it might become a movie, and then merchandising might happen. So different than the way we do it now. It really wasn't until the 80s that we see merchandising leading the development of children's characters and those sorts of things. In the old days, the kids had to like it first, and then they said, oh, well, then we should sell them stuff.
Which totally makes sense. Another item that this was actually kind of an interactive item that changed hands a couple of times during the event. When we first started, George addressed the group of us that were there and said, there's something in this estate sale that is over 200 years old. And if you find it, I will give you a $5 discount off of your purchase. So admittedly, we all wanted to find it, but we had no idea what it was. And it took us a very long time. And I will admit, Jeffrey was the first one to find it, but it is a piece of pewter. And I actually have a pewter collection. I don't want to mess up my camera right now, but you can actually see just off the side of the piano, there's a couple pieces you can see. This ended up being a much older piece of pewter than I have. And it was something that I should have seen because I was at the table where this was resting against the wall and I missed it. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, George. This one has the hallmark stamps both on the front as well as on the back. And you were talking a little bit about the age and how these things were marked. And can you just talk a little bit about the hallmarks and the older pewter pieces?
Definitely. Those hallmarks, or touch marks as they're also called, because they would touch it with some sort of an embossing tool when it was made, indicate the maker. They indicate the country of origin. If you see on the left, there's a little thing that looks like an animal. That's actually supposed to be the lion, which tells you this piece is English. And that's an important distinction, because if you have a 200-year-old pewter piece that's American, it's going to be worth many times what the English pieces are, because there were so few people in America at that time, and because pewter was something that not very many people had at first. Now on the back, you're going to see something, I believe the mark on that one, it'll be hard to see, but I think that in the middle, if you could get it, you see the Rose of Sharon under the crown. That's also an indication of English work. And then the other letters are going to tell you who the pewter makers were. And there's great online resources. I can't remember who made that one. You'd have to look it up. I did the research a long time ago on it, and it's just left my head. But the thing about pewter plates is, back in that era, and we're talking that, I believe that dated, if I remember right, to about 1805. And the pewter was just starting to be used as dinnerware. And pewter is a composite that includes lead and tin and other things. So it actually was not a very good thing to eat from, not highly recommended. But it was a big deal then, because at that point, if you were wealthy, you could buy porcelain. But porcelain was something that the Chinese guarded the secrets for making for many, many centuries. And so most porcelain coming to England, which is why we see a lot of Asian themes on English porcelain, like blue willow, for example, was shipped around, and it was what they call Chinese export. Well, you had to have money to buy that sort of thing. And this is still in an era where there's only beginning to be a merchant class and a middle class, and most people are living essentially in a semi-feudal state. Most people ate off of wooden bowls that they made out of a chunk of a tree until about that time. And pewter was something that was able to be produced, so more people were able to have it in their homes. So it was considered important at the time. And so we see more of the English pieces, but now the market for pewter goes up and down. It's been down for probably the past 15 or 20 years. I'm just now starting to see people get interested in it again. So your purchase was probably pretty timely.
Well, and I will say that it will stay in my personal collection, so I'm not going to be reselling that one. So Jeffrey found it, got the benefit of the discount, but did not want to offer it for resale, so I took it off his hands. All right, since we jumped over to Europe to cover some pewter, let's go ahead and cover some pottery. So this is something too that I think, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say either Jeffrey or Misty might have picked up some of these pieces as well. So we started divvying up all of this Holland pottery. And so I ended up with the 2 pitchers. All of the pieces are very small, and then 3 small miniature vases. So I know I will definitely have to go back. I think Jeffrey did a video on his haul, not from you, when he had picked up these pieces and sold them himself. But so I'm going to definitely have to go back and take a look at it. But what I was hoping you might be able to touch on is the comparison of, I know there was one additional piece I did not pick up. I don't know if, I think maybe somebody else did, that you said was later And then I found these two, one with a significant amount of information on the bottom, and then this smaller one with far less information. You can just talk a little bit about the eras, and then compare and contrast, if we see these in the wild, which tend to be the more valuable ones or the more collected ones for people to pick up.
Okay, well, what you have is Royal Gouda ware, Gouda, or as they say in Holland, Gouda. I was informed, which is good information because I'm terrible with foreign languages. But if you'll pick up one of the brown ones, the brown with the Art Nouveau the Art Nouveau designs are the earlier ones. It was in the same period that you have the French designing Art Nouveau, which is basically sinuous, naturalistic designs. And then the white ones are going to be a little bit later. I believe pottery was made in the Gouda area. And yes, it is the same place that makes Gouda cheese. I believe that there were maybe a dozen different potteries, maybe more. And so all of that information on the bottom is going to tell you, one of those is going to be a factory name. I believe Zenith was one that you showed. One of them is going to be the initials of the person who painted it. That was actually a factory control thing. So if there was a flaw, they could go back to the painter and say, oh, something's going wrong on your line, and correct it. And so, and of course, they were marked made in Holland, because this ware was very, very popular at the time it was made. It was sold all over the world, and I've had collectors from all over the world say they've seen it before. The pieces, you can tell by the painting which pieces are in the Art Nouveau period, and then when it gets more into the florals that are a little more specific, like that's an Art Nouveau piece you're holding, and that's a very nicely done one with a lot of design. And then when you get into the ones where it's more like the bouquet of flowers like that, that's going to be a little bit later in time. Then, of course, during the Second World War, they didn't really produce. And then after the war, you see more modernist designs. And I think you have one with a handle that sort of goes out at a flare. I think the one in your left hand may be maybe as late as the 1950s. So there's different periods. There's a good old reference book on Royal Gouda. Now, the prices, again, are not as high as they were 30 years ago, but it's beautiful stuff in it. The prices that it's at today, it's people are really getting interested again. I have a couple of collectors in Canada who just love it. So I think it's a fun thing. I'm glad you got some pieces. I'm glad Jeffrey found some too. And I really like this stuff a lot. I have to admit, I held back a couple for me because
you're entitled.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't buy out of the estates I do, but this came from the estate of a woman that I used to work with, and I kept a couple of pieces and paid them for posterity's sake as a nice memory.
Excellent. Well, since we're talking about the pottery, and that's why I was hesitant to say the name, because I didn't think it was pronounced Gouda, but I couldn't remember what the Dutch way to say, so Gouda. But we've got more pottery, and this again. So just like the Gouda, just like the some of the kids' toys, these are all things that I've never ever tried to go down the path of. But this piece I know is Mexican pottery, and this style of pottery I had seen before, but I'd never seen a piece like this with this kind of detail on it. So I was just curious, talk a little bit about these pieces.
Well, that's also hand painted under the glaze, and you'll hear it referred to as Palomar, and you'll hear it referred to as Ken Edwards, because Ken Edwards was American, but he went to Mexico and he saw the tradespeople who were painting ceramics in Mexico. He liked the style, and he helped them develop the lines and market them. I remember as a very young child in the 1970s, we lived right by the Mexican border, and my mom would go over the border sometimes with my dad to go out for the evening, and they'd come back and they'd sometimes have a piece or two of that. It was just something that you bought as tourist wear, and nobody thought much of it. But now that it's 50 years in the past, it's become rather collectible, and some of the bigger and more elaborate pieces are actually pretty pricey, and the values seem to be going up because it is something that is associated with modernism and modern decor. So there is definitely interest in that area.
Excellent. Now you talked a little bit about jumping over the border, traveling. So jumping over, I've got some travel items, which this is an area of personal interest of mine. I have a small collection of what these are dining menus. We got two of them from cruise ships. So the cruise ones are dated. This one is from the SS President Cleveland. This is from 1962. Just so I got some great art on the front of that one. And then the next one, and what's ironic about both of these, and I am not making this up, if you were to go into my Etsy shop or my Etsy wish list of items that I've put into my cart or that I favorited, both of these are in that list. I've had these in my shopping cart. It's some time waiting for them to go on sale. So one of them, the President Cleveland, and then this one was another cruise line, Captain's Dinner. I can't remember which cruise line this one was. This is also from the 60s. And then these, I haven't had as much with the train menus. And I do know this was another in fair trade, since Jeffrey gave up the pewter to go into my collection. I gave up one of the menus I found for him so that he could give it to Aaron, because there was a very cool, probably mid-century modern menu from the train. So I've got Amtrak. I was just curious where you got these, and is this I have a collection myself, and they're never particularly expensive. Are these collectible?
They are collectible, and especially the older ones. I got interested in the cruise ship menus because a friend of mine's aunt went on the USS Lurleen to Hawaii in the 1950s and brought back the menus, and my friend actually gave them to me, and I have them framed. I did a YouTube video. Actually, I put on a show off your bunker challenge during the lockdown. And in my apartment in Florida, I have them on the wall. And so I've always looked for them. I've always liked railroads. I've always liked railroad collectibles. And I figured out early on as a dealer that if the older ones were collectible, then the more recent ones would eventually be too. So I've always looked for them as well. That particular stack came out of an estate in Florida. I had a gal who, again, she was moving to assisted living, and she lived in a condo, and she and her husband had traveled quite a lot. And so that's where that stack of paper came from.
Awesome. All right. Really quick, just keep bumping into it, so I want to be able to move it. One of the pieces I actually got several salt and pepper shakers, and they're all great. And I'll definitely either have them on live sale. I might actually do I'm actually going to be doing one of my themed live sales will be on vintage kitchenware. So some of them will show up there. But I got these two from George. So they are metal base with this great globe top with the etched floral design. And they were very clearly marked, so I could do my own research. So I didn't really need George to tell me what these are. These are all marked, both marked Vogue, shaker set, and they're Pool. And so Poole. So I did a little bit of research on it, but what I found interesting, and the reason I'm going to throw it up, is because these were manufactured. Pool was from Taunton, Massachusetts, and it just so happened I did make several stops on the way down and on the way back. One of the stops was to pick. I picked up in Effingham, and I had this in my live haul video from Sunday. It's a piece of Copper Guild craft copperware. And when I discovered Pool was in Taunton, Massachusetts, I'm literally sitting there going, that sounds really familiar, and I don't know why. So I did a little searching, found that Taunton, Massachusetts does a lot of metal work. And this also is actually stamped, Taunton, Massachusetts. So I just wondered if George, you had any stories or any information, like what was special about Taunton, Massachusetts? Why would two completely different companies be doing metal work there?
I am not certain why that became a metalsmithing center, other than the fact that it was in the same vicinity as Paul Revere. And Paul Revere was one of the merchant class who got tired of the English rule, and of course is one of our patriots who helped launch the Revolutionary War and the overthrow of the English. And Paul Revere was from that part of Massachusetts as well, and he was a silversmith. That was and a coppersmith. And Revere ware, I believe to this day, is still based in that area. And so there was something about I'm sure part of it is that shipping is a consideration when you're moving metal around. And in the days before railroads, well, that's close to a port. You're near Boston, so you could send it up and down the seaboard where people lived. What I don't fully understand is where the metal came from that they used there, because the metal mines are all elsewhere in North America. But for whatever reason, I believe because he was there, other metal companies over the years assembled there as well, and it just became the place for that sort of manufacturing.
Oh, that's cool. That's interesting. And since we're talking about metal, I actually realized I had another piece of metal. One of the things, again, drifting into some new areas that I've never really been in, I watch as many of Misty's videos as I can. And Thrifter Junker Vintage Hunter really gets into the vintage kitchenware and a lot more of the metal and vintage. And so one of the things that we found, and I found it first, so Misty couldn't have it, was this toaster, but she was kind enough to actually try and educate me a little bit. So what I ended up getting was just a mix of kitchen stuff. So one of them is the toaster, which I just thought looked fantastic. And as Misty pointed out, the fact that it still had the cord was actually a pretty major deal. But some of the other kitchen stuff I found, I just thought was hilarious. And again, I am going to have a vintage kitchen sale. All of this stuff is going to end up reselling it because this is not something for my own collections. There's this original a roll of Northern paper towels. I just thought it was bizarre, so I had to pick it up. I also really loved the paper carton of the 1 dozen eggs. So I don't know what vintage this would have been, but I thought this paper with it still has little dividers inside. And I do know, whoops, there it goes. And I do know, just because I'm on the edge of a fairly rural area, that I don't know about the paper ones, but like egg cartons actually do sell pretty well because people use them. So there's some cool kitchen stuff. Is this an area that you specialize in, or is it just because when you're picking up estates, they tend to have kitchens?
I love kitchenware personally, and all 3 of those pieces came from the estate of a dear friend of mine who passed on, who had a wonderful shop, and she specialized in kitchenware. And so I was asked to sell everything off for her family. I only had a few pieces left, and I decided it was I'd taken them to shows and things, but I hadn't had those items out. I found a box I hadn't put out, and I thought, you know what, I should put kitchenware out, because I've been asked over the years, what's the thing that consistently sells in antiques and vintage if I was going to collect or do something? And I said, well, if you're worried about long-term resale value, kitchen always holds its value because it looks cute, it's comfy to people, it reminds them of happy times, and it also is something that in a lot of ways is functional. That toaster, I'm sure, still works. And in the 1920s or early 30s when that came out, the big boom of the 1920s had a whole lot to do with the invention of electrical household appliances, electrically run vacuums and toasters and coffee pots, and all those things that we take for granted were new then, because before that you had to use things you put on the cook stove, and the stove probably was gas or wood, and everything on it had to sit and percolate and all that. And then all of a sudden, here's this thing, you just plug it in the wall and it does it all itself, and you don't have to fuss, you don't have to mind it. So it was a big boom in that period. And so people like them because they're still functional. Now, the pop-up toaster hadn't been invented right away. So what you had to do is you had to put the toast in, and yet that's a Westinghouse, and just about every big company made them. You put the toast in, and then you had to pay enough attention to not let it burn on one side. Then you had to flip it down and take it out, turn it over, and put it back in. So they're still functional. I don't know too many people who actually use them. They're mainly for decoration.
And that would, I mean, it's not my style, that I'm not going to be keeping it in my collection, but I could see that would look very cool. And like I said, you see it on Misty. I know that Fatbird Finds and Jeffrey, a lot of the people that are on here have that as well. It's just an area I never felt comfortable getting into. So it was really kind of fun to be able to be surrounded by people that knew this stuff way better than I did, and was able to, educate me a little bit to say, okay, well, this is why you should get it. Or maybe you don't want to get it if it was too specialized, because I don't have it. I don't have a following. I don't have a group of people that are looking for those types of items. So it definitely was an educational process. But well, I will say, I'm going to wrap up pretty quickly because I know that Stephanie has already had to sign off. She's prepping for her sale, so I don't want to get too tight to that. But anyone who watches my shows, and it's becoming kind of a joke, and it's not really a funny joke, it's just a weird joke. I love my coasters, and George is holding out on me because I specifically said, hey, George, you have any coasters? He's like, no. He lied. He did have coasters, and I found them. They called to me, and I found this set. And vintage Katie from Vintage and Vinyl, you should absolutely love these. You probably already have them. It's literally a little album that says record coasters, and they are little coasters in the shape of albums. Yeah, they have felt on the back. and the album. There's probably nothing you can really share about these, George, but I just wanted to highlight that even George sells coasters, and even resellers can sell to other resellers if you end up specializing in certain things. George didn't know what to do with these, didn't even know he had them, and I found them, and I'll be able to resell these, and I will put these either on my Etsy shop or I might put them in a live sale. But I do have to do a little bit of research because I don't know what era this would be.
I think
it is stamped on the back, Loyal Products NYC. So it's going to be something I can research. So I'm looking forward to that. I thought they were kind of cool. So
me too. And I think they're from about 1960. And the thing is,
the 60s, really? Okay, I thought they'd be later than that.
Late 50s, early 60s, I'd say, when record album, when you'd have records in an album like that before individual sleeves. The great thing about this business is there's really room for everybody. There's the ultimate collector who loves and prizes it, but there's all levels of the business. There's pickers, there's wholesalers, there's resellers, there's retailers, and I'm all of those people depending on the situation and the time. And when I went, I'll make it real quick, but when I went to appraisal school, I remember that one of the Antiques Roadshow appraisers who taught us held up a very lovely Lenox vase and said, "How much is this worth?" And we all said, "Oh, $125. And she said, "How much is it worth if the sheriff just put a sign on the door that says you have 3 days to move everything out?" And that's why there's different levels of the market, is because different scenarios. When I'm doing an estate sale, I want to price for resellers to buy because I need a whole lot of stuff to go in a real hurry. And it's more than I can deal with. I don't have time to list every item online and or take it to a show and try to get top dollar for everything. And that's okay, because it's just a different scenario.
All right, the last item I'm going to have, this is going full circle back to George. For those who do not know, George literally wrote the book on treasure craft, and Misty and I basically started raiding his place trying to find all the treasure craft. She ended up with at least one piece, and I ended up with this one. And it's possible, I think George said the one that Misty got was actually photographed for his book. I just happen to have a piece of treasure craft, but that's okay. If you've joined my one of my deep dives, 2 deep dives ago, I had George on. He talked about vintage cameras. And when we first talked about what topics, I wanted him to talk about treasure craft, but scheduling wise, he wasn't near his collection. So someday I'm going to get George to talk about treasure craft and go through that book. And I don't know if George still has if you have any of your copies left. If you buy the book from George, he'll sign it for you. So I have a signed copy of the treasure craft book from George. Anything particular you want to share? This is the Hawaii one. And
well,
I think it's just stamped the way most of the other stuff is stamped.
Yeah, that one has Treasure Craft of Hawaii, and the Hawaiian pieces, all things being equal, the same piece made in California is not as desirable as the one made in Hawaii, and the glaze is called lime. Lemon and lime glazes came out about 1970. That was not in production as long as some of the orange and other glazes that they did. But yeah, just fun stuff. It was souvenir ware. They intended originally just to make it so that you could buy it if you went to Hawaii. And then at the 62 Seattle World's Fair, the Hawaiian State Pavilion had a whole bunch of it in there because it was something made in Hawaii, and it went crazy. It was right when surfing and the Beach Boys and everything were coming on. And all of a sudden they had to convert the California main plant to make all of this tiki ware because everybody wanted it. And that's where all those giant leaf-shaped ashtrays and stuff come from.
And that's great. And as Misty said, she'll be keeping her piece of treasure craft forever. I will at least be keeping it until we do a deep dive. And then I really like it. And it's got the dark colors on it that actually it could totally work with what I've got. But this is just a little fun piece. And actually, Sandra Runyon is asking, since I mentioned it, how do they get the book from you? What would be the best way to, do you have any books available still to be able to ship?
Yes, thank you. I that's wonderful. I am just email me the antiquenomad@gmail.com is the easiest way, and I'll be glad to set that up for you. And if any of you folks who've asked me about some other things are wondering why I haven't responded to you, I'm getting ready for my first show since March, and I'm leaving on Thursday to go to Michigan. They have a very rigid set of social distancing, mask wearing limits on number of people, etc., and we're going to give it a try. I've really missed doing the show, so I've been really caught up in that, but I promise I'll get back with you on the stuff that you've been requesting.
Now I know that, or I believe that Kelly from Mossstone Vintage, no, Mossstone Story Vintage. I want to say she's in Michigan. Where will where will the show itself be?
It'll be in Petoskey, and I believe she and Superior Girl Vintage are going to try to show up. And anyone else who's in the vicinity, it's northern Michigan up by the lake near Traverse City. I've never been there. I'm really looking forward to being somewhere else. They're phase 5, and I think they've had one case in the entire time this has been going on, and the person is very well. So they're going to be very rigid about making sure we all stay that way.
Excellent. Well, Mossstone Story is saying to bring you a book. I will say, Kelly, go ahead and send him an email. If I were George, I'd want you to pay for the book first before I took space in my trunk trying to haul all that stuff up. But that's me. George is more caring or more considerate than I am.
I'm just casual.
But remind him, and I'm sure he will have. The book is actually really interesting. When did the book come out, George? You said it was a while ago because you commented on a different haircut or whatever. So I don't remember when you published it.
Yeah, I was bleach blonde back then. It's been 15 years. I was a much younger man, but it was a lot of fun to do. And it really just sprung as a labor of love because I collected this stuff and none of the California pottery experts could tell me anything about it. So I had to find out for myself.
Excellent. Now, a lot of people are asking about specific shows. Do you know any other shows beyond this one in Petoskey?
Petoskey. The only other show that I know I have scheduled currently is the 3rd week of July in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I want to say that date is the 17th. Yeah, I believe that's right. So Michigan, and then 2 weeks later, Tennessee. I'm hoping to go out west for my business partner is working on a big estate sale I should be helping with. I haven't been able to get there. And I also am hoping that maybe our big flea market up in the mountains on Labor Day might still go off. We'll see. Things are a little different out west. So we're all just going to try it and see what we can do carefully, and we'll have to go from there. But those two I know are set and they are planning to happen and don't seem like they're going to be canceled.
All right. And that's what it's all about, is staying safe. You know, some things are going to get canceled. Some stores are changing their hours. I think around here, even Goodwill's not open as long as they used to be. I hope everyone's staying safe. As we went from a private event where we could control our own environments and moved on to some locations in Paducah, we were all wearing our masks. We were all Purelling left and right. And it's just, that's at this point, it's going to be the new normal. And I really do hope some of those shows start happening. My personal favorite is a flea market, but it's like a high-end antique flea market that happens every month. They haven't had one since, I think they had one in March before things shut down, but they keep canceling. And it's supposed to be the first weekend. They canceled the one coming up for July already. So at some point they'll open. We're all disappointed, but we got to stay safe. And if you're in an area that numbers are spiking again, pay attention to that and just do what you can to make sure you're not passing it on. So don't want to end on a bummer note. So we're going to wrap things up. I really appreciate all the people that joined me tonight. I'm glad I'm not sure if these live haul videos, I don't even do haul videos all that often, but this was just too much of an opportunity to pass up. I really appreciate George, appreciate you being here. If you're hopefully, because you've heard about this from my channel, you probably already know, if you've gone this far, you're not already a subscriber to my channel, I would really appreciate if you would subscribe. I did just cross over 600 subscribers, so I'm super excited by that. And every little bit helps, just help me build up this channel. Go ahead and thumbs up the video. That kind of stuff helps too. And if you're not a subscriber to George, the Antique Nomad, you really need to. This is not superfluous. This is not blowing smoke. This is every single person that was in this with him this weekend. We all deferred to him. I think Misty is an expert in so many things. Jeffrey, I think, walks on water. Fatbird Finds is a blast, and they know so much about so many different things. We all turn to George. And so if you don't follow George, you are really missing out, because he has such great knowledge. And I was in the same room with him as he's filming. Actually, one time he was filming right outside the bathroom door, and I was afraid I was making too much noise. But I really can't wait to see what he filmed, because he's going to be talking about stuff that I probably walked right by and said, I don't want that. And George found it. So, check out his channel, The Antique Nomad. And I think that's That's your tag on everything, right?
Yes.
Instagram and YouTube, The Antique Nomad, and his email address, theantiquenomad@gmail.com. Definitely, you know, even though the book's 15 years old, it's a collector's item of what you see when you find treasure craft, stuff like this. Yes, I don't see it all the time, but when you see it, it's great to then go back to the book and know what you saw. So thanks again for everyone for joining me. Thank you so much, George, for joining me. And watch everyone else's channels and support each other. And if you are interested, live sale at Thrifting Adventures in 15 minutes. So support Stephanie and her live sale coming up in a little bit. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
all.